In this episode, I had the pleasure to welcome Marc Wheeler, the new CMO of Storyblok, in my studio here in Hamburg. Marc used to be the CMO also of X, helping sell the company to SAP for $2.5 billion, which is crazy. And now he joined Storyblok to actually transition the go-to-market team into a scalable business. We talked about why he went into the company, and the first project he did was a complete rebrand, plus also a complete revamp of the whole go-to-market approach. Marc told me why his philosophy is stop selling, start helping, and what he actually means by that, and how he actually transferred that philosophy into his go-to-market motions. It was an amazing podcast. I hope you enjoyed this episode. Have fun. Welcome to another episode of the Revenue Marketing Real Talk podcast. Today, we have another thought leader episode with Marc Wheeler, current CMO of Storyblok. Marc, as someone who can basically work at almost every tech company in the world, why did you specifically decide to join Storyblok?
Ooh, good question. One of the things I like to think about when I'm ever thinking about joining a company is, would I buy the products myself? And interestingly, with a CMS running a marketing department, you're typically involved in purchasing something like that. And when I started to really understand what Storyblok was, there was this point. I would buy that.
Yeah.
What a great thing! What a difference that could make to my own team.
Yeah.
And then you start to think about, does anyone else do that? And there really wasn't. Storyblok had come up with something very special. And so when you're in that situation, it becomes a wonderful thing to market.
When you joined the company, the very first thing that you did was basically to create a whole new positioning, plus a completely new brand, a completely new go-to-market and marketing strategy also. Please take me with on the thought process on your journey about the moment where you realized we have to change this. We have to do something here. What was that moment?
Well, as with all things, it's a story that kind of evolved, actually. So when I first met Dominic, it was very apparent that the messaging wasn't quite there. And we also wanted to really grow our business in North America.
Yeah.
And there is always somewhat of a gap when you're a European company positioning a proposition that you also want to be successful in the US. So there was already this initiative to do something different. And in fact, when I first met the team, they had already embarked on working with a company in the US. But what's very important when you're starting to work on a brand project is it's not just about understanding the category or the industry. You need to understand, I think, the people, the product, the whole proposition. And actually, before I even joined, that project actually came to a halt. And so suddenly when I joined, it was, Marc, the board has been expecting a whole messaging renewal.
Yeah.
And so that became sort of project one. And what became, as we went through the process of building the brand, we kicked off with the messaging first. And really, actually, it was originally just going to be a new messaging project. But it actually moved into a complete rebrand as we started to bring in different parts of the team. When they started to see what the messaging was about, the whole prior image and the darker teal colors didn't really live up to this new brand message we had. And so it's a bit like when you move into a new home, you sort of paint one room and it looks fantastic.
Yeah.
And then you look around the rest of the house, I'm going to have to repaint the rest of the house now. It was a little bit like that.
Understood. Yeah. I think there's many marketing executives that constantly think about, do we really need a completely new messaging now? A rebranding is now the right time? And you've just said that especially when putting more focus into North America, right? You felt like the messaging was a little bit off.
Yes.
Can you explain a little bit more in depth what kind of symptoms you saw when you joined that justified making that transformation now?
Yeah. It's a real learning for, I think, many of the successful European companies that have really spawned in the last 5, 7, 10 years.
Yeah.
That we really like to explain what our product does, how it works, and why it's better. An American audience is looking for some other attributes. They're looking for what they can achieve, not necessarily what it does, but if I were to buy this, what will it help me be able to do that I couldn't do yesterday? It's a little bit more aspirational in its approach.
Yeah.
An American audience is also looking for a little bit more confidence in its thought, a bit of swagger.
Yeah.
I think every consumer wants to buy from a winner, but it's particularly the case in the US.
Yeah.
You'll find, things like Gartner reports and Forrester reports play a very important part in a business buying decision.
More in the US than in Europe?
Yeah, more so than in Europe. And it's about instilling confidence. So part of the messaging and part of the rebrand, I often talk about it should feel like the pussycat looking in the mirror and seeing the lion. You have to play bigger, because you're trying to instill confidence. You've got the energy has to show, the brand has to show some energy. And as Europeans, I think sometimes we're a little bit more
cautious,
cautious or modest, perhaps.
Yeah, politically correct.
Yeah.
All that stuff, yeah. So would you say that this major decision was something that you instinctively felt based on your years of experience in leading marketing organizations, or was it also backed by hard data?
Yeah, it was. I think one of the things that's very difficult about the category that we're in, which is essentially MarTech, is it is filled with a lot of companies that promise to do a lot of things and often under-deliver. It's also a category where features tend to have a very short, a shorter half-life. So what I mean by that is, someone says they've got an AI this week, and next week, so has competitor number 2 and number 3. It tends to be a category in which a lot of companies tend to promise a lot of things. And unfortunately, in MarTech, also they under-deliver. And that's what took our messaging in a very different direction, a more human direction. And it became very evident. We went through a process of interviewing over 30 different interviews. We met employees to get a sense for the company and its culture. We met customers and looked to get the essence from them of what was important to them. From that led us to the story that we have today, which I think is a very, like I say, a very human story. We call it the Joyful Headless campaign.
It's much more emotional than it was before.
Yes. And what we found in our discussions was a very fanatical customer base. Our employees were just the same. You were living in this ecosystem of, we can do something better. We can do something different.
Yeah.
And the messaging in itself really was just a reflection of that, of what we saw in our customers. And I think it's what they wanted as well. I think there's a high level of frustration with MarTech technology today. A lot of companies and people have bought things and it hasn't necessarily delivered what it promised. And so we wanted to, I think, deliver on the human emotion of what it was to be a customer of Storyblok, as opposed to promising features and capabilities.
Yeah. It's crazy to think about this, because most people think in B2B, it's not about emotion, right? We need to be professional. People only care about the rationale, and anything like that. But at the end of the day, it's also humans that are purchasing a product, right? And humans all have emotions. And we tend to forget that very easily because we want to be so professional, like this dark blue keynotes and presentations, etc. So I find it very refreshing to hear that you are actually going away from that rationale, but focusing more on the person at the end, and their emotions and their aspirations also at the end of the day.
I will say I did have there was a moment when we were about to present it for the very first time where I'm like, it's got to have a rational statement. It's got to have a rational statement. And in fact, we revisited a little bit. So we actually, there was a point where, okay, how can you convince someone of a return on investment from an emotional statement? And will our sellers buy into that? Because of course their customers are looking for sometimes a rational statement. You can't predict the individuals you're presenting us to. So we actually added we added a rational payoff, which was bigger, faster market impact. So there was a moment where I felt, I think we want to be strong and brave and bold and brave enough to lead on the emotional state, but it did need a rational payoff. So we added that as well.
I can very much sympathize with what you say, because I mean, we run a lot of marketing campaigns, especially also creative ads, and what we always see is that it's much easier to catch people with their emotion if it's messaged in a humorous way, maybe kind of connecting with their pain points, etc. But then the value prop must be justified with a rationale. So the second kind of message, there needs to be some like faster, bigger market impact, with probably even backed by data in the best case, and that usually then tends to yield the best results.
The other attribute we wanted to build in, which is another thing I think that European companies figure out that they have to develop if they want to go and be successful in the US, is a brand personality, and the tone of voice. And so that was another thing that was a key part of the project that we wanted to deliver. And again, it wanted to feel like you were meeting any one of our employees. You were bumping into them in the corridor for a chat. And, I remember in some of our first drafts, there were some swear words in there. Okay, do we shoot? Does that, how come? But, we actually, we try to go as strongly as we could on it, and to basically feel like it was just having another chat like we are.
Yes.
Over a coffee meeting, a coffee chat like this, so that it felt real. So that it wasn't just the headlines and there was a real payoff in the human message all the way through our copy. And so we spent a lot of time really in that detail of trying to make this feel like when you read about Storyblok, It feels like a friend.
Mm. I like that very much. When I saw it first time, I was like, this is so refreshing to see. I connect with it so much better than before.
Yeah.
It was really good. So I have huge respect for the work you did there. Forwarding to the go-to-market and marketing strategy transformation, because you not only did a re-messaging and rebranding, but you also completely revamped of how you go to market, basically. Why did you take on such huge projects at the same time? And why did you decide that you also need to recreate and rebuild your whole go-to-market?
Yeah. So when you join a company, and particularly when I joined Storyblok, we had just completed an additional investment round.
Yes.
Just a couple of months beforehand. And of course, there are always high expectations.
Yes.
But I also put high expectations on myself. And one of the things that I found was I was bumping into conversations where we were talking, at a lead level that, is this an organization that we can be successful doing business with? And there was just a lot of these types of conversations. The second thing that I found was that we were looking to talk to verticals. It's something that's actually very difficult to do in marketing. But what I've found historically is when you don't have a clarity of who we want to sell to and who we want to market to, it starts to create an unnecessary tension. And so from my perspective, what I found was a company with an incredible culture. And I wanted to make sure that that carried on, because as the demands on growth step up, the pressures step up.
Yeah.
And so suddenly that starts to create cracks. And so the way to remove the cracks is to make sure that sales and marketing are working to the same agenda. So with that, what we decided to do was I sat down with my peer in sales and put to him an idea about actually giving up on the approach to vertical marketing and moving towards a horizontal model, and looking at our and determining a much sharper ICP and going through a very data-driven process for ICP. So what we did was we built out a propensity model. And the propensity model is essentially a way of looking at all of the accounts in the world. We looked at over 4 million different companies right around the world and looked at our firmographic attributes that we've been successful with in the past. So we looked at our existing customer base and said, what is it about those organizations that have made them a good fit for us and us for them? And we broke that down into firmographics and technographics. And then essentially a bit like a dating site, if you like, what we did was we looked at those attributes, tied them against these 4 million organizations, and scored every one of those organizations around the world with, are they a good fit?
You scored 4 million organizations.
Quite literally 4 million organizations. And that then brought us down to just over 1 million organizations where there were a number of technographic and firmographic attributes that said there was a good fit. But because we'd scored them, we were able to then break that down into a number of tiers. So that would then enable us to then help us to focus our sales team. So the second big thing you look to do in a project like this is you're essentially trying to look at how do you make each of your sellers in your organization equally successful. It's a trick that franchises, I think, have got very good at over the years. It's where do you open your next Starbucks or where do you open your next McDonald's? They do a lot of research into, okay, is that going to be a good town? Is that going to be a good street?
Yeah.
Is the demographic in the area ideal? So there's a lot of work that goes into selecting a location. And I like to take that same thinking to defining what is a good sales patch for a seller. It's something I learned a number of years ago when I worked at a company called Nutanix. I remember when I joined, I'd actually been brought in by the head of sales at the time. And on my first day, he said to me, "Oh, Mark, we're about to hire 50 new salespeople." I said, "What? This year?" No, this quarter. And, this level of pace of growth was something that was new to me. And he said, we need to go develop an approach to how do we make sure that each of the 50 salespeople is successful. It comes down to territory definition, sales enablement, a whole bunch of things. But it was there that I learned territory definition and applied this approach to propensity modeling to help make sure that when a new salesperson's turned up, they got their MacBook, they got their hoodie, they got their stickers, and they got a sales territory in which they could win. And so the idea is that you look to create a basket of accounts that have a value assigned and a score assigned that means that you should be able to hit your quota for the coming year. So that was a big piece of work.
So you specifically built a whole plan for sales, territory plan, but you also restructured of how marketing is done at Storyblok.
Yeah.
Right?
Yeah. One of the things that companies tend to, as we do in life, we go through different phases in our life, right? And organizations go through a startup phase and a scale-up phase. And sometimes the needs and expectations of the team start to change as we as humans has changed. And it was the same with the team. And the big change that we needed to drive was in a startup period of time, what you want is individuals owning pieces of the work that can get on with it, own it, and deliver a great result. As you move into the scale-up phase, when you're starting to take on goals such as being a market leader, showing up bigger, turning up as the lion and not the pussycat, it starts to become the work that can't be achieved by one person alone. You need to create, you need to engineer in collaboration. You need to engineer in teamwork so that a group of people are working on something bigger than themselves. I often think about, the analogy I often think about is there's this big event, I think it is in Spain every year, where they're in a tent and people climb on each other to build the human pyramid. It reminds me a little bit of that, which is we count on each other or need each other to build something bigger. And so it needed a restructuring that enabled that. But the key change was that I'm a big proponent of the Forrester campaign framework. And what we wanted to do was move away from driving campaigns that were typically off the back of content, that were typically monthly or even quarterly driven, to campaigns that would last a year, if not 2 years. And so Storyblok today has 4 defined campaigns that it's building out over the longer term. So we built out a new campaigns function. We introduced field marketing, which we hadn't had before. as well as doubling down on areas such as marketing operations.
Yeah.
Because I've always had a strong belief in strong technology stacks being an enabler for a highly successful marketing team. And growing our product marketing function and developing our growth marketing function, which for us today encompasses our global events, campaigns, digital marketing, so our paid and organic social programs, as well as our content team.
Yeah.
And so campaigns was really about thinking about long term. Content was also quite a significant change. When we were chatting last week, I talked a little bit about one of my the companies I've really admired over the last 15 years is HubSpot. They introduced, I think, a very unique way of driving content 15 years ago, where they were really campaigning on this topic of inbound. Mm-hmm. And people are like, got to be what is inbound?
Yeah.
But in that process of creating great content, never once did they was it about, you've got to buy our marketing automation platform. That's of course all they did at that time, and of course they've moved into other capabilities since that time. But what they were trying to help you be was a better marketer.
Yeah,
they were trying to inform and educate you. And it's so that was a new approach also for our content team, which to that time had been, it's all about headless CMS. You got to buy headless CMS. It's the new modern thing that companies should be doing.
Yeah.
Versus starting to think about what are the challenges that developers have, marketers have, IT organizations have.
So instead of starting communicating from your product, you start the communication at where your buyers at, from their pain points, their challenges, and you help them first with their challenges. And then maybe at some point you put your product into the conversation in a smooth way.
When it's such a competitive category as ours, you've got to go build trust.
Yeah, 100%.
And
it's also not a decision that you make every day to change your CMS, right?
No, on average, most organizations are changing every 5 or 6 years.
Yeah. So that means you need to build trust for a long time in most cases.
Exactly that. Yeah. Exactly that. Although I think the change time is probably accelerating right now, because I think with the advent of things like AI search, I think there's probably a more compelling need now to modernize.
Speaking of AI and the whole world accelerating at a pace that we've probably never seen before, how are you now building your whole marketing org differently than you would have done so 5 years ago?
Yeah, it's a very tricky subject, because there really are two sides to AI today. Mm-hmm. One is there's a side that marketers, I think, have huge concern about, particularly when it comes to things like content and imagery. Is the quality going to be right? Is the copy going to be right? There are concerns over things like governance in many organizations. Some organizations have even stopped AI coming in through the door because they're concerned about the information that might leak out. And also the quality of the data that we have in the systems. I have seen an example recently where the AI scraping read something about someone on LinkedIn where they're, it's a very unfortunate situation. They had a family member that had died.
Oh.
And but the AI had scraped this, and in an email or an automated email, basically it said, congratulations on your recent news about your father. And you're like, oh God.
Jesus,
so it can go wrong, right?
Yeah.
It can go wrong.
Yeah.
But on the flip side of that, marketers really need to start embracing AI. Because I think if they don't, they're going to get replaced by the marketers that do. But I think what we're starting to see is AI for marketers is being utilized to really support their productivity. So where I'm seeing great examples of it today are, in the digital space, for example, is automating the approach to SEO. So a lot of content writers today are great at content, and they've had to learn this SEO skill to make sure that the content itself scores well. But now there are automated approaches to that. In fact, one-click approaches to that. Later this year, in fact, in June, we've got European laws coming into place, right, that will require European companies to make sure their content's more accessible. So having AI for things like alt text, great. It's one click. So I think translation's another one that is, I think, also becoming an area where it's so good now that it's not just translate, but it can consume the tone of voice as well, and automate translation so that we can make sure that websites are done that way. So I see for marketers that AI is being utilized to take away the chores, but not everybody is embracing it. And I would encourage them to do so. Where's it applying change in our approach? Well, we're now using predictive modeling for the way that we're executing, for example, our paid programs, but also our nurture programs. And so what we're doing now is, I mentioned earlier about our ICP and our target account list.
Yeah.
We've not only scored them on whether they're a good fit, but we also score them on their buying stage. So on one axis, we've got in propensity. On the second axis, we have intent. So that now what our systems are doing is we're presenting messaging that is related to your business, but also your buying stage. So if you're showing early stages of intent, then we'll say, "Hey, Tim, I guess you're not quite ready to buy yet, but look, there's some things that could be quite interesting to you to think about in terms of your digital presence." Versus if you are towards the end of the buying stage, "Tim, you haven't spoken to us yet, but you really want to, but before you make a final decision." So we're making that our whole approach to content and communication totally dynamic. In fact, at last count, just in English language only, there are over 150 derivatives now of our dynamic email delivery, and we're also using it in areas such as our customer outreach. So we're using it to make sure that our messaging is contextually relevant and unique and personalized to you as a potential customer. So these are some of the things that we're starting to see today that are changing. But tomorrow is probably a bigger worry. The way, search has been such a powerful medium for consumers over the last 20 years. But it's very clear now that search is changing. People are starting to utilize AI based
LLMs,
search to not just look for something, but to ask a question, to try and build an answer. So then the whole nature of discovery and search is going to go through a massive change in the next 18 months.
I agree. And I would also add that now is a very great opportunity to go start being an early adopter of doing LLM SEO, so that you're not ranking on Google, but also on all the other LLMs. And you can get a huge competitive advantage by starting now and starting early.
I think if you aren't starting today, you could quite literally be invisible in 18 months' time.
Yeah.
It's as significant as that. And so people's behavior in terms of the searching is changing. But the problem is that the underlying way in which we store and serve our content, yes, some of it's being scraped, but you need to rethink the way that you're delivering content in this new world in order that it can be consumed within these LLMs and shaped and delivered accordingly. And if you aren't starting to work on this today, this is going to be one of those subjects on which you could get left behind quite quickly. So that's probably one of the most prevailing areas that I think we're focused on today, and also trying to help our own customers with, because it's not an easy one.
I love how you've now laid a foundation which makes it very easy for close marketing and sales collaboration and alignment, right? Because every single account that you're now targeting has been checked off by sales and marketing, right? There's no wrong accounts that could potentially go into the pipeline because they don't get to see any messaging or any advertising from you anyway, right? Which makes you basically have a 100% guarantee on delivery on your marketing, especially on campaigns on LinkedIn, where you can probably just upload your target account list and you make sure that all money goes into those accounts. Same for outreach, which is awesome. And you've also said, what I found very interesting, that for you, sales is about driving productivity and marketing is about driving efficiency. Can you please explain that to me once again in more detail? And also what I question myself is, how do you make sure by having different kind of goals or driving forces that you still have close alignment?
Yeah. So my team will laugh at this, but I refer to it as the Panini sticker book approach. Yeah. I think most people remember as kids, we all grew up having one of those Panini sticker books. Actually, they're a great customer of Storyblok, actually. But what we remember from those sticker books was, you'd buy the book, it was empty, and it would come with a few starter packs, and you'd fill in the first stickers. But what you realized by turning the pages was, well, this is my TAM. This is essentially the job that is in hand over the coming months, that with my pocket money, each week I'm going to go and buy some more packets and start to fill them in. And so that's the shared approach that sales and marketing have at Storyblok. It's our job is to go and fill the Panini book. So why efficiency and productivity? Well, marketing is typically in many organizations one of the largest spenders. And with that comes a lot of responsibility, I believe. When you're spending X million, you want to make sure that you have that Panini sticker book, that sense of clarity and purpose behind what it is we're trying to do and trying to fill. We don't need to market to the world. We don't need to market to everyone. It's expensive. When you think about the average cost per lead being in the hundreds of euros or hundreds of dollars, then efficiency is a really important metric. And investors pay a lot of attention to this. They refer to it as this ratio of LTV to CAC.
Yeah.
And so, as a CMO, this is the first topic that often comes up when you stand up in front of the board.
Yeah.
So efficiency is very important, and so I look at it right down to our cost per lead, and it stems from: are we doing the right kinds of marketing to the right kinds of organization? And is it achieving the right kind of yield? Downstream of that, our job, if we do that bit right, is that we're going to be giving leads that are matured and developed to the next stage in our organization, which is often a BDR or a sales team. And we want them to be in a position where, okay, this is the right organization for us to be dealing with. I'm meeting with the right person, the right persona. They're well briefed and researched on what it is we do. And if you do those things right, then the time frame or the deal velocity, so the time frame between when we call something an opportunity and it closing into cash, is reduced. So that time frame is incredibly important, and many organizations now are measuring it in days and pay a lot of attention to that time frame. And so that's why that is really about seller productivity. Also, I mentioned earlier about our new approach to campaigns. One of the things that we've done is we've mirrored our campaigns with what we call sales plays. And essentially, if you think about a campaign, it's mapping to the buyer's journey. When it's done really well, it maps to the buyer's journey. And so the idea behind a sales play is to provide a corresponding seller's journey. So marketing our job is not just to create an opportunity and throw it over the net.
Yeah.
It's then to have a corresponding support plan, if you will, for our sellers in order to then take a lead that we've created and take it all the way through to cash.
I love that, because I think most organizations still think, okay, marketing is responsible for generating leads. Once a lead is generated, marketing, job's done, hand over to sales, right? Sales takes over until close one.
Yeah.
But I think it becomes more and more transparent that this is not the best method to go with. Marketing and sales must work together until close one and even into expansion.
So the measure of LTV to CAC is really a combination of your marketing and sales expense.
Yes.
And so that's why this is very important. So as a CMO, you're on the hook for this.
Yeah.
So if all you are doing is thinking about creating leads, the board is not going to be too happy, and you're not really delivering strong shareholder return.
Yeah.
So we have to really focus on things like deal velocity, conversion ratios, as well as making sure that we're delivering leads at an efficient cost per lead.
Yeah. Thank you so much so far. I would love to dive a little bit more into all the learnings you've collected during that whole transformation. I mean, it must have been a crazy time. You told me that during the past 6 months, there were lots of days with 20-hour work days, which is insane. So I'm also very happy that now you have the time to be on this show. But what would your message be to the CMOs who hesitate to reposition because of risk? And what can be their solution to actually get going? What kind of mindset perspective could you share here?
Look, I think there are two kind of costs. There's a cost of doing something, and there's also a cost of doing nothing. And so I think that sometimes there is a sense of, okay, if the brand isn't broken, leave it. But there is also an opportunity cost, I think, in actually moving forward with a change like the one we've done, because I think it starts to help build an internal belief. What you're doing on a project like this is you're not just mobilizing change amongst your customers, you're also mobilizing change amongst your colleagues and team members, not just in marketing, but the whole organization.
Yeah.
And I think for any CMO, what we all instinctively know is that we are better when we mobilize the company as an army.
Mm-hmm.
And so a messaging and rebrand project of this nature really starts to help harness and capitalize not just on the folks in your direct team, but also the wider organization. So it's quite a powerful moment.
What is one of the more surprising outcomes that you've now experienced? Maybe externally, from the market, from customers, but also internally from team?
That's a tough question. But when you're going through the project like this, there are lots of moments when you question yourself and you become quite introspective about the whole topic. I think one is it starting, what do people think of it?
Yeah.
Is it making a difference now to the bottom line? And you're looking for those moments. And I think when you suddenly get those points of acknowledgement that I remember when we did the Storyblok rebrand, there were multiple points that came alive for me. The first one was, this feels like our CEO on steroids. And if you've met our CEO, which I know you have, then it really resonates.
It resonates. Yeah.
But then when you start to hear it externally, and people start to say, that's different, or and more importantly, it just feels really you. And I particularly with this one enjoyed the fact that for many people, our rebrand came across with such authenticity. There was nothing in this piece of work that was trying to make us something that we weren't. It really was just an encapsulation of who we already were and brought it to life.
Yeah.
And so I think that those acknowledgements that I heard externally and through our partners, those were great moments.
Now that you've gone through the process, looking back at the whole transformation, is there anything that you would do differently now, or that you would maybe absolutely not do again? Anything that you would approach in a different way?
Trying to do it all at once. But no, in all seriousness, I think there's a real joy for myself and for the team in what we accomplished in such a short space of time. And really, we still got so much of it to capitalize on.
Yeah.
I don't think even since we launched January 12th, we haven't slowed up. There's still so much more to do. I think both of us are into cars. And I often think about it as launching a Formula One car at the beginning of a season. You've worked so hard. The engineers have worked so hard on the car. But it's only when you get it to the track and you start to send it round, you start to examine it. The car, they start to talk about the car's potential. Yeah. Because up to that point, you didn't really know. And I think we're now starting to really examine the potential of our car and what it can do. Are there things that I wish we hadn't done or might have done differently? One project we embarked upon was trying to build a video that articulated the story behind the rebrand. and trying to do it, I think, in a sort of corporate professional way. And what I've realized now is today, so much organic content is so much stronger than I think sometimes than the corporate content. And I wish I'd gone down that pathway actually in the end. But otherwise, it's been a real pleasure.
When was the exact date the rebrand was launched?
January 12th.
January 12th. Now we're at the beginning of May. Probably this podcast will be launched sometimes in May. What can you say already about true business impact from the rebrand? Now we have like 3 months after it.
Yeah, so Storyblok drives its business through 2 motions. One which we call product-led growth, which is essentially, think of it as where essentially your website's doing the work for you and selling for you. It's people are coming to your website, experiencing or learning about the product and then essentially experiencing it directly and then providing their credit card. The second for us is sales-led growth and enterprise sales-led growth. So that's where a sales team is involved. And both of those, I think, have seen benefit. So, for example, on our product-led growth, one of the things that we do is we measure people coming in to try our product in what we call cohorts. Mm-hmm. And so each month there's a cohort. And then what we examine is the time frame between them entering, becoming a cohort, part of the cohort, and being a customer. In our PLG business has dramatically narrowed. So in other words, they're becoming a paying customer far more quickly than they were before. So that's been great.
That means you get way more qualitative signups also.
Correct.
Yeah. You're attracting the right audience better.
Correct. And they're buying in and to what they're seeing and experiencing much more quickly. So that's been a very positive byproduct in the PLG business. And in the SLG business, whilst I can't go into specific numbers, one of the key leading indicators for us is our pipeline growth.
Yes,
our pipeline build.
Certainly, yeah.
And it's one of those worrying moments where when is it coming? When's it coming? And through March and April, we just started to see. In March, we started to see green shoots, and then in April, it's been quite staggering.
So it definitely took a couple of months to see true impact, but then it came.
Yes, and it's an exciting level actually that is far exceeding both our goals and our expectations. So April in particular has been one of those moments where yes, it's working.
When you had a nice drink at the end of the month. Nice.
Yes.
Congratulations on that. One final question for you, Marc. What's one belief about B2B marketing that you think is going to die in the next 12 months?
I think we talked about it a little bit. I think the nature of SEO is going to dramatically change in the next 12 months.
Yeah.
And you can't just switch off one and jump to the other. I think it is going to be a transitionary period. You're going to need to be able to do both. But it isn't just a matter of going to your SEO team and saying, hey, go and learn a new skill. You also have to go and completely rethink how you're presenting content to the internet. Because the way AI search works is entirely different to the way today's SEO works.
Yeah.
So it's actually quite a significant team project.
Yeah.
But yes, I don't think it's one that CMOs can ignore.
It's crazy because we're actually investing a lot of investment and resources into figuring this out right now with many accounts, and we're already seeing positive impact. But the crazy thing here is that no one has really figured it out yet. it's such a new thing that you can't just copy and paste the old SEO playbooks that used to work and apply them to LLM search, because it's just a new game. So it's also a very interesting kind of period to see kind of what works and be at the forefront of executing on it.
But one could imagine we might need to solve this together in the next 2 years.
Yeah,
the window
100%.
is very short.
Yeah. Marc, thank you so much for being on the show. I love your insights, and thank you so much for being here and sharing all of your experience through the transformation.
Well, I really appreciate the invitation.
Thank you. And thank you for listening. If you have any comment or would like to ask Marc another question, feel free to put them in the comments or just reach out on LinkedIn to Marc. He's also there. So yeah, thank you for listening and see you next week. Bye.